Okay, so you really threw us a curveball this time, a deep dive on smart thinking.
Hmm.
And you send over like a mountain of notes from this book, Smart Thinking Skills. But don't worry, we are going to dig through all of it.
Well, it's pretty cool stuff, right? The book really breaks down how to improve like your reasoning skills, how to analyze things better, and it all starts with this, well, kind of simple idea. Even the simplest thought, it's basically like a chain, like links of different ideas.
It's true.
Yeah.
I never really realized like how many steps my brain takes until I actually try to explain something, especially something kind of complicated. And the book actually says that reasoning, it's not just something that happens inside your head, it's actually a social act.
Oh, that's such a good point. And actually, yeah, the book talks a lot about how important communication is. Because, it's not enough to just have smart thoughts. Like, you got to explain them to other people so they get it too. Like, think about it. You wouldn't explain something to your boss the same way you'd explain it to, I don't know, your kid, right?
Oh, 100%. I guess knowing your audience is like part of being smart in the first place, right?
Yeah.
But the book, it goes beyond just communicating, right? It also talks about how to like build arguments. And it calls these basic building blocks claims.
Right, right. Claims are basically like statements about things. Like, they can be true or false. It's how we, put our ideas about the world out there. Think of them as the bricks we use to build a whole argument.
Okay, so if I say something like all dogs are loyal, that's a claim, right?
Exactly. And that particular claim, it's got a really big scope. It's saying that all dogs everywhere are loyal. But if you said, my dog Fido is loyal, that's a much narrower claim.
So the scope of a claim, that's like how wide a net it casts, right?
Yeah.
But claims can be tricky because sometimes they've got these opinions kind of hidden inside, even when they sound like a fact.
Oh, for sure. And the book calls these hidden opinions value judgments. Like, if somebody says fast food is unhealthy, it sounds like just a fact. But it's also saying that healthy is good and unhealthy is bad.
So it's a good reminder to always like read between the lines, right? Even a simple statement can be loaded with like hidden opinions. So we've got these claims, our building blocks. What do we do with them? How do we like actually put them together to make a strong argument?
That's where the book talks about linking different claims together. It brings up these things called premises. They're like your supporting reasons, the things that back up your main point, the conclusion you're trying to make.
Okay, so it's like each premise is like a pillar that holds up the roof, your argument.
Yes. That's a great way to put it.
Oh.
And there are like two main types of premises. There's dependent premises and independent premises. So dependent premises, they're kind of like a chain, Each link relies on the one before it. So if one link breaks, the whole chain falls apart.
Got it. So independent premises are more like having a bunch of backups, right? Even if one fails, the others can keep things going.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And the book actually says that dependent premises, even though they're kind of fragile, they actually make for stronger arguments because, well, they give you a fuller picture, It's harder to poke holes in an argument when it's got a bunch of interconnected reasons all supporting each other.
It's like having multiple lines of defense for your idea.
Exactly. And to help you see how this all fits together, the book has this really handy tool. It's called the analytical structure format.
Okay, I'm trying to picture this. What's it look like?
Imagine like writing down your conclusion at the bottom of the page, then like draw arrows up to each of the premises that support it, kind of like a flow chart, but for like your whole argument.
Ah, so you can see, like, at a glance, how all the pieces fit together, right?
Yeah.
Does the book give any examples of how to actually use this format?
Oh, tons. It even shows you how to take like a written argument, someone else's, and then you can map it out visually. Like you're taking apart a clock to see how all the gears work.
So we can use this tool to build our own arguments, but also to, like, take apart someone else's argument.
Yeah, exactly. It's like having X-ray vision for arguments, But the book doesn't stop there. It also talks about these things called framing premises. They help connect those supporting reasons to your main point.
So they're like the glue,
Yeah.
right? Holding everything together, showing why your reasons actually matter.
That's a great way to put it. They provide context and make sure everything is relevant, The book also makes a big deal about your claims needing to be, well, two things, well-formed and well-founded.
Okay, hold on a sec. What's the difference between well-formed and well-founded? They both sound good.
Well, a well-formed claim, that just means it's clear and easy to understand. No rambling, no confusing jargon. And a well-founded claim, that's one that's actually backed up by some solid evidence.
So it's not just about making stuff up. It's about being able to back it up. That makes sense. But how do we know if the evidence is actually good?
Oh, yeah, that's where things get tricky. So the book talks about something called appeals to authority. That's when someone tries to win an argument by basically saying, well, this expert agrees with me, but you got to be careful because not all experts are created equal.
Right. Just because someone famous says something doesn't mean it's automatically true.
You got it. You got to be a critical thinker and actually evaluate those sources. Like, are they really an expert in this particular area?
Wow.
Do they have some hidden agendas, is what they're saying, actually based on solid research?
It's like we have to be detectives, right? Investigate the sources before we can really trust them. And sometimes we don't even realize we're making assumptions that our audience might not share, right?
Oh, all the time.
So
It's
like,
a big pitfall. The book suggests this cool strategy. Imagine trying to explain your argument to someone who knows nothing about this. Would they follow your logic? If not, you're probably relying on some hidden assumptions that you haven't even thought about.
that's a really cool tip, like a stress test for your argument.
Hmm.
But the book goes deeper, right? It talks about different types of reasoning, like how we connect the dots between our ideas.
You're right. It dives into 5 different types of reasoning. But before we get into those, there's this big difference between inductive and deductive reasoning.
Oh, those words always make me a little dizzy. Can you, give us a quick refresher?
Of course. So deductive reasoning starts with a general statement and then uses logic to get to a specific conclusion. It's kind of like saying all birds can fly. A penguin is a bird, therefore a penguin can fly.
Wait a minute, that's not right. Penguins can't fly.
Exactly. And that's the tricky thing about deductive reasoning. If that first general statement, if it's wrong, then even if your logic is perfect, the conclusion is going to be messed up.
Oh, so it's like building a house on a shaky foundation. The whole thing can collapse. So what about inductive reasoning? How is that different?
Inductive reasoning, it goes the other way. It starts with specific observations and then uses them to make a bigger, more general statement. It's kind of like saying, every swan I've ever seen is white. Therefore, all swans must be white.
But wait, they're black swans, right?
You got it. So inductive reasoning, it can lead to good conclusions, but we got to be careful about making those big generalizations, especially when you haven't seen enough examples. The book really stresses how important it is to have enough evidence from different sources before you draw those big conclusions.
Okay, so both types of reasoning, they've got their strengths and weaknesses. It's like we need both tools in our toolbox, and we got to know which one to use for the job.
I like that. And actually, those 5 types of reasoning the book talks about, they're like those specialized tools.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more about those 5 types of reasoning, like what they are and how they work.
Okay, so those 5 types of reasoning. Well, let's start with causal reasoning, which is all about figuring out why things happen, connecting cause and effect.
Ooh, okay, that sounds interesting. So it's like, playing detective, trying to solve the mystery of, why something happened.
Yeah, exactly. You see a car skid off the road and it's an icy day. You might use causal reasoning to say, well, the ice caused the accident. But the book reminds us it's not always that simple, right? Maybe the driver wasn't paying attention, or maybe the car had a mechanical problem. It's not always so straightforward.
So even when it seems obvious, we got to be careful about jumping to conclusions.
Exactly. Smart thinking means thinking about all the different possibilities and then, looking for evidence to back up those causal claims. Now, another type of reasoning the book talks about is reasoning from generalization. And that's where we look at specific cases and then we make broader statements about a whole group or a whole category.
Oh, I do that all the time. If I try a new restaurant and the food is amazing, I might just assume all their food is great.
Yeah, there you go. A perfect example. But, the book, it warns us to be careful with these generalizations because they can be really misleading. If we don't have enough evidence, remember those black swans we talked about? Just because you've only seen white swans doesn't mean they're all white.
Right. I guess the takeaway here is to make sure our generalizations, they're based on lots of different experiences, not just a couple of, random examples.
Yeah, exactly. The more diverse your sample is, the better your generalization is going to be. Okay, so let's move on to another really interesting type of reasoning. It's called reasoning from analogy. And that's where you compare 2 things, right? Things that are similar in some ways, and you use that comparison to draw a conclusion.
Oh, I love analogies. They make complicated ideas so much easier to understand. It's like saying learning a new skill is like climbing a mountain, right? It takes effort, it takes persistence, and you need the right tools.
Perfect example. Analogies. They can be so powerful for explaining things and even for persuading people. But the book, it cautions us to be careful, right? Because just because two things are similar in some ways doesn't mean they're the same in every way.
Right. Like that mountain climbing analogy wouldn't work if you're, I don't know, learning to play the piano.
Yeah.
Right. You don't need ropes and crampons for that.
Exactly. So smart thinking, it involves recognizing like both the strengths and the weaknesses of these analogies. You got to be careful not to stretch that comparison too far.
Okay, so we've got causal reasoning, we've got generalizations and analogies. What's next on our list of reasoning styles?
All right, next up is reasoning from specific cases. So this is where we use like real life examples or individual stories to back up a broader claim.
So it's kind of like show, don't tell. Instead of just saying like pollution is a problem, you would tell a story about a specific community that was affected by, I don't know, pollution in the water or the air, right?
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Those specific cases, they can really help bring those abstract ideas down to earth, make them more relatable. They can help us understand like the real world consequences of things, like policies or actions.
Yeah, I can see how that would be really powerful,
Oh.
Kind of brings the argument to life when you have those vivid examples.
Exactly. Okay, and last but not least, we have reasoning from terms. This one is all about like making sure we're all on the same page when it comes to, what words mean, what concepts mean.
Oh, yeah, that seems super important, especially these days when, words can be so easily like twisted or misinterpreted.
Absolutely. The book, it really hammers home the point that clear definitions are essential for good communication and reasoning. If we're using the same word but we mean different things, well, that can lead to all sorts of misunderstandings and like faulty conclusions. Think about a word like freedom. That can mean so many different things to different people, right?
Oh, totally. Like one person's freedom might be another person's chaos. So before we can even like argue about freedom, we have to make sure we're talking about the same thing.
You got it. Smart thinkers. They get that. They know words matter and they take the time to, really carefully define their terms. So there you have it. 5 types of reasoning. Like we said, they're tools in your thinking toolkit. Each one has its own purpose, its own strengths.
Wow, this is like a crash course in better thinking.
Yeah.
But the book doesn't just like drop these tools in our lap and walk away, right?
Yeah.
It also talks about how all of this connects to research, actually using information effectively.
You're right. The book really stresses that research and reasoning go hand in hand. Effective research, it's not just about like finding information. It's about actively analyzing it, asking the right questions, and like connecting the dots.
So it's not enough to just be like a Google scholar, copying and pasting facts. We got to be those critical thinkers, the ones who can like sift through information, figure out if it's credible, and then pull it all together into something, meaningful.
You got it. And the book, it actually gives us some really good guidance on how to approach research in a way that like actually strengthens our reasoning skills. And it all starts with understanding the context, like what are the underlying assumptions? Who is the intended audience? What are the big questions we're even trying to answer in the first place?
So it's not just about the what, it's about the why behind the research.
Yeah. The book encourages us to see information not as like just these isolated facts, but as part of a bigger web of knowledge. Like you're weaving a tapestry, not just collecting like random threads.
I love that. It's about seeing the big picture, those connections, those patterns, not just focusing on the tiny little details. And that kind of leads us to this idea of like reading critically, right?
You got it. Critical reading, that's not about just like passively soaking up information. It's about like really wrestling with it, questioning those assumptions the author is making, evaluating their evidence, thinking about, different points of view.
So it's like having a conversation with the author, even if they're not like right there in the room with you. You're pushing back, asking those tough questions, forming your own opinions.
Exactly. And the book, it gives us some really useful questions to ask ourselves while we're reading, like, what are the author's biases? What are the limitations of their research? Are there any viewpoints they might be missing?
This is giving me so many ideas for like my next research project. But the book, it doesn't just stay like theoretical, right? It also gets into the like nitty-gritty details of finding and evaluating different types of sources.
It does. It talks about the difference between like direct sources and indirect sources, which, can be a bit tricky to figure out sometimes.
Okay, remind me again. What's the difference between like a direct and an indirect source?
A direct source, it's like going straight to the original, like firsthand accounts, original research data, historical documents. The real deal.
So if I'm researching like the history of flight, a direct source would be, I don't know, the Wright brothers' own diaries or their notes.
Exactly. And an indirect source would be like someone else's biography about them, or, I don't know, a textbook on the history of aviation.
So that indirect source, it's kind of like interpreting or analyzing that original
Yeah.
stuff, right? Not presenting it directly.
Exactly. And, the book says that both types of sources, they both have their place.
But they each have like their pluses and minuses, right?
Right.
Like direct sources are great for getting the real story, but like they might be limited in what they cover.
Hmm.
Whereas those indirect sources, they might give you a broader perspective, but they might also have like bias, or maybe they're incomplete.
You got it. Smart researchers, they recognize that. And the best research usually involves using like a mix of both.
Okay, this is all making a lot more sense. But I mean, we're not just like gathering all this information for fun.
Yeah.
We're trying to use it to build our own arguments, our own explanations, to like share our own ideas and perspectives.
You're absolutely right. And that's where the last chapter of this book comes in. It kind of ties everything together. It gives some practical tips on how to plan and write like those really compelling arguments and explanation.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Huh.
What are the secrets to writing something that'll like grab people's attention?
Well, it all starts with having a clear purpose for your writing. What are you trying to accomplish? What's the main message you want to get across? Who are you talking to? Who's your audience?
So it's not just about like throwing words on a page. It's about being intentional, strategic.
Exactly. And the book, it encourages us to really think about like what our audience already knows, what their biases might be, and how we can tailor our message to, really connect with them.
Oh yeah. I've definitely been guilty of writing stuff that's like way too academic, full of jargon that most people wouldn't understand. It's like, I forget that not everyone spends all day reading research papers, right?
It happens to the best of us. But the book, it gives some good tips for making your writing more like clear and readable. It talks a lot about structure and organization, using headings, subheadings, clear transitions, stuff that helps the reader follow along.
So you're like creating a roadmap for your reader instead of just, giving them a jumbled mess. And of course, we're also backing up our claims with solid evidence, right? Citing our sources, being transparent about like where we got our information from.
Of course. But here's a cool twist. The book suggests using that analytical structure format. Remember that tool we talked about earlier? Well, they say we can use it for planning our own writing too.
Wait, so we could use the same tool for taking apart other people's arguments, A&D, for building our own. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's like having a blueprint for your whole argument. You can map out all your main points, your supporting evidence, your conclusion, all in a way that's really clear and visual.
This is like next level writing skills.
Yeah.
But the book, it doesn't just focus on the like logical side of things, does it? It also talks about style, tone, making your writing engaging and persuasive.
Yeah, for sure. It encourages us to write in a way that's clear and concise, but also like a little bit fun.
So we're not just robots churning out boring academic prose.
Yeah.
We can actually inject some personality, some passion
Yeah.
into our writing.
Absolutely. The book reminds us that the goal of writing, it's not just to inform people, it's to connect with them, to inspire them to think a little differently.
I love that. It's about seeing writing as an art form, not just a technical skill.
Exactly. The book encourages us to use vivid language, compelling examples, even humor, to really bring those arguments to life.
So we're not just stating the facts, we're telling a story.
Exactly. Storytelling is like one of the most powerful tools we have. It makes those arguments memorable. It helps us connect with our audience.
This has been such an amazing journey, like exploring the world of smart thinking. We've covered so much, from the like basic building blocks of an argument to the like really subtle details of research and even the like social context of academic writing.
It's been great unpacking all these ideas with you, and hopefully our listeners are feeling, inspired to use some of these tools in their own work.
I know I am. This whole deep dive has given me so much to think about. But before we wrap up, I got to ask, is there like one big takeaway from this book that our listeners can like really chew on?
Here's a thought-provoking one. The book argues that knowledge, it's not static, it's dynamic, it's constantly changing, which means our understanding of what's true, that's always evolving too, right? As we get new information, new perspectives.
Wow, that's powerful. So it's not just about learning the right answers. It's about being part of that like ongoing conversation, being open to, changing our minds as we learn new things.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole idea of smart thinking so exciting. It's not about reaching the final destination. It's about enjoying the journey,
Yeah.
embracing that ongoing exploration and discovery.
That's so true. It's like we're always learning, always growing, right?
Yeah, for sure.
This has been like an amazing deep dive. We started with those basic building blocks of an argument, and now we're talking about like the big picture, how knowledge changes over time. It's like I feel like we just scratched the surface.
I know what you mean. There's always more to explore, but if our listeners, take away one thing from this whole episode, I hope it's this. Smart thinking, it's not just for academics. Anyone can learn to think this way.
I totally agree. Like whether you're at work writing a report or trying to make a tough decision, or even just like having a debate with your friend, these are tools you can use every day.
Right. And, smart thinking, it doesn't mean you got to be right all the time. It's more about being curious,
Yeah.
being open to new information and being willing to change your mind when, the evidence shows you something different.
Oh, yeah, that's huge. It's about like the process, not just the outcome.
Exactly. So, next time you hear someone making a really strong argument, try applying some of these tools. Ask yourself, what are their main points? What kind of evidence are they using? Are there any hidden assumptions they're making? You might be surprised by what you find.
And hey, if nothing else, you'll sound super smart at your next dinner party.
That's right. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into smart thinking skills.
And we'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.